Sweets.
We're doing it great. We're number
Doing
one.
it great.
The Mad Scientist Podcast. With Chris and Marie.
Chris and Marie. Getting sciencey.
There should be
What?
so many things that rhyme with Marie, but I can only think of sciencey now. Hello, dear listeners of the Mad Scientist Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Cogswell, here with my wonderful co-host, Marie Mayhew. Marie.
What's going on, my people?
How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. How are you doing? What's going on?
Doing great. We were off this last week because I had a party for my wife and I's wedding. We got married a year ago, and then actually we're planning a wedding party for about a year in New York where our families live. So we had our wedding party this weekend in Staten Island, where we're from, in New York City. It was a lot of fun. It was a great time. Thank you to everyone who came out and celebrated with us. And we just got a lot of stuff going on here now around the office here, Marie.
What I love, really quickly, if I may say, is you just eased into that party. You just wanted to make sure this whole marriage thing, sticking. We got a year under our belts. I guess we can have a party.
If it lasts through a party planning, then you know it's going to last.
Through the party planning, and your poor, if I may say, poor mom probably was like, we have to have the party!
Oh my God, my mom is flipping out.
Well, as well she should, man. Guy getting married. Jeez Louise, taking a year.
Telling you.
I'm just teasing.
Terrible son.
Yeah, no. Busy week. Launched the first episode of Whatever Remains.
Sure did, and it's great.
Thank you.
No problem.
I'm pretty proud of it. Hoping it's hoping we can sustain it. I got one under my belt so far, and I gotta tell you, man, like it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, right?
It is a lot of work, and you're like, my voice is so like, dear God, am I chewing on glass? Like, what the hell's going on? Why do I sound like, am I chewing cud? Like, what the hell's in the background? And you're just like, I cannot say, and then words start to sound funny, and then you're just down the rabbit hole.
100%.
But hopefully we'll get a few more out and finish up the series, but it's a lot of fun. I feel like I'm actually learning a lot about a period of time that I already thought I had relatively good knowledge of, which is like the Kennedy administration and the Cuban Missile Crisis and sort of all of this weird history that builds up to what happened in 2016 in Havana, Cuba, when a bunch of American diplomats that were just going back to work in Havana became really sick because of some weird circumstance. So yeah, I've been, finding out some really, really crazy facts that are actually true to life, that are beyond fiction. So it's
nice.
Fun.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yes.
Well, listeners, today's episode, we are going to be talking about marijuana myths.
Woo!
Now, as we all know, marijuana is the devil's lettuce.
The devil's cabbage, baby.
The devil's cabbage. Satan loves marijuana. So basically, marijuana is really interesting because it's one of those topics where it really has a lot of meat on kind of both sides of, I would say, the ideological spectrum, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can be very, very against marijuana and have a whole set of facts with you and a whole set of facts that are real, some facts that are real, but then build on top of those a tremendous amount of fear-mongering and scare tactics and ridiculousness. And then you can have the other side where, you're very pro-marijuana and you might have some facts with you too, but then also fear-mongering and scare tactics and, it's just kind of like on the one side, it's fear-mongering with a cowboy hat on. And then on the other side, it's fear-mongering with a crystal necklace on. It's really interesting in my mind. Marijuana kind of shows us that weirdness of, mythology really doesn't have a preferred political party, let's say.
No,
so,
it works. Bias works equally well for both sides.
Totally does.
Very quickly, within 8 hours ago from where you just came from, Mayor Bill de Blasio. Mayor Bill de Blasio has ordered the New York Police Department to stop arresting people for smoking weed, in that they are preparing for legalization, statewide legalization of marijuana. Which I'm like, that's pretty amazing. I mean, just to read that they're actually putting that out there is, what we will no longer be taking this action in the largest city, or one of the largest cities in the country, is a pretty big step.
Yeah, 100%. It's a really interesting one because it is one of the more interesting ones because it's kind of a tale of a decriminalization of a drug that has taken so much longer past other prohibitions, right? I mean, especially for a drug that we're going to get into all this. Let's get into all this after the break.
Let's get
Jake,
into all this. Sorry.
Hit it.
Welcome to the Mad Scientist Podcast. This week's episode, Weed, Pot, the Devil's Lettuce, 420 Blizzard.
Woo! Marijuana.
So, Marie.
Mary Jane.
Marijuana. So this is, I like this. I like this a lot. This is from teens.drugabuse.gov/drugfacts/marijuana.
You had me at .gov on this one.
What is marijuana? Also known as boom, bud, chronic, gangster, ganja, grass, herb, kiff, Mary Jane, MJ, pot, reefer, skunk, and weed.
Smoke a little weed, have a little blunt.
So good. All right. So marijuana is really interesting again, because it really started as, so marijuana has kind of been around since people have been around, right? I mean, it's it's a drug that, really, so cannabis plants are native to Central Asia. They've been cultivated since 4,650 BC.
Oh my God.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, the actual rope, like the stalk of the plant itself, has been used for rope, clothes, canvas, and it's what is known as hemp.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, the oil from the seeds is used for different things too. So soap, lotions, paints, varnishes, and lamp fuel. And actually, when it was first brought over to America, or rather, was brought over to the Americas with the Jamestown settlers, which is super interesting. They grew marijuana and hemp, basically, for this purpose, was because it was a very good cash crop generally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, so marijuana has been around since that time. Now it's used recreationally, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Has again been for as long as it's been around. Right. So approximately 4,000 years ago, there's information on Chinese physicians using cannabis to treat gout. It was used throughout Europe to treat rheumatism, tetanus, cholera, depression. It was used for all kinds of different things. Right. And really was also in some ways there's potential for it to have been known as the Indian drug soma, which is mentioned in the Vedas. Although that's kind of not super well known necessarily, but really the first way to use it was in religious ceremonies, right? And basically they would smoke it, right? Which, I mean, kind of is how people use it today in many cases,
Mm-hmm.
right? And again, it was kind of shamans and religious people who would use them to induce trance-like states, right? Now, so its use as a ritual drug is quite long-lived, and really that's the way that most drugs were used throughout history, right? Was they were used for their psychoactive purposes that could allow people to, go into rhythmic trances or to feel, what's the word?
Euphoric?
feel euphoric, feel different than they would in their normal daily lives, right?
Yes.
Now, so basically it was used, so it's been used since, 4,000 BC, right? For different reasons, used ritualistically, used in religious rituals and things like that. And it's been found across the world, right? So we found pipes in Ethiopia that were carbon dated to about 1320 AD. It's been found in different areas of the Sufi Muslim world. It was used throughout the Greek worlds, throughout China, Central Asia, South Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, France, all over the place, right?
Yeah, everywhere.
Yeah. Now,
pretty much.
Really, though, its reintroduction to the West was from basically from the French physician Jacques Joseph Moreau, who wrote on the psychological effects of cannabis, basically, right? And again, then that was kind of pushed forward some more when 1842, the Irish physician William Brooke O'Shaughnessy basically brought it back over from Bengal with the East India Company. So, and there's all kinds of really interesting, there's a lot of really interesting books and stuff on marijuana use or literature that uses marijuana use as parts of its, parts of its, I guess, story, basically, right? So there's a book. So everyone knows of the one, The Confessions of an English Opium Eater, right? Which is Thomas de Quincey's account of him totally loving laudanum, right? So he smoked opium and just got super fun and weird.
Totally loving laudanum.
So, this guy Fitzhugh.
Hang in there, everybody. It's the drug episode with Chris and Marie.
Having a great time. This guy Fitzhugh Ludlow wrote a book, an autobiography of his life called The Hashish Eater in 1857. Basically talking about his use of hashish, which is a cannabis extract, basically to get super duper high and talk about philosophy and other things. I like the subtitle here too. It's called Life of a Pythagorean.
Because that has everything to do with just getting totally baked on hashish and hanging out and then looking at your hand for 7 hours.
Good. Right. They call them fingers, but I've never seen them fing, Marie. Now, it actually is a really cool quote from Kubla Khan on the cover of the 4th edition here. It says, quote, "Weave a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread, for he on honey dew hath fed, and drunk the milk of paradise." And it says, the hashish eater, being passages from the life of a Pythagorean, which I guess is what he called himself when he was high on hashish. Now,
is there any truth to the rumor that hashish is the base root of the word of assassin? Or is that myth? I think that's myth.
That's, I believe it's a different part. It is similar. The word is similar, but I think it's actually like it's like Asai. It's the name of like an Indian tribe, I think, of I forget where they were actually originally from. It's not from hashish.
Because there's that whole, really, really creative myth about that. And I was like, that can't be true. That can't be right.
Yeah, there's
no.
So it's actually originally from it's an Islamic sect, right? That's where the word comes from, right? And it basically means people who are faithful to the foundation of the faith. It's Asasiyan or Asasiyun. I'm definitely getting that wrong. And so supposedly the idea is that they misinterpreted that, or people misinterpreted that, in other words. So and basically that, yeah, maybe. So that word assassin came from this an order of basically assassins who basically they came over and they were like, okay, we're now your like rulers, we're the Mongols, and then this like Islamic sect was like, nah, we're assassins now.
And
so they got them.
Hell no, we're assassins now.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Anyways, okay, so Fitzhugh Ludlow in 1857, and then also another book, Les Paradis Artificiels by Charles Baudelaire. Again, basically talking about, his time doing different drugs and stuff. But really, in the United States, it's known for So, okay. So it began to be criminalized in the 19th century, right? So Britain banned it in 1840, basically because they believed that it was making their indentured workers in India too bad at working under slavery, I guess. Right? It's pretty screwed.
Oh man, that's some good colonialism right there.
I'm telling you.
We should not let them smoke anymore, William.
So,
lay about as they are.
Actually, what's really funny is Canada supposedly criminalized it before any reports of its use in Canada.
Oh, the Canucks.
Canada was like, get it out of here. We don't want any of that.
Nope.
And really,
nope.
What kind of happened was it was kind of put together with opium, right? It was, again, very misunderstood. It basically stated that, this is from the Hague Convention. The International Opium Convention was signed at The Hague, January 23rd, 1912. And basically what it was a drug control treaty. So, and it was registered in the League of Nations. And it was part of a conference with the United States, basically to put restrictions on the sale of opium through China. Right. And so it was signed by Germany, United States, China, France, the UK, Italy, Japan, the Netherlands, Persia, Portugal, Russia, and Siam. And so basically what it did, there's a specific section here on marijuana, on hash, specifically on hashish, that said, quote, "The use of Indian hemp and the preparations derived therefrom may only be authorized for medical and scientific purposes. The raw resin, charas, however, which is extracted from the female tops of the cannabis sativa L, together with the various preparations, hashish, chira, esrar, diamba, etc., of which it forms the basis, not being at present utilized for medical purposes, and only being susceptible of utilization for harmful purposes, in the same manner as other narcotics, may not be produced, sold, traded in, etc., under any circumstances whatsoever."
Buzz killer.
Yeah. Now, it was then actually taken over. That rule was in place until 1961, when it was taken over by the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs of 1961, which basically lists the various types of narcotic drugs that cannot be sold or are not to be traded across the world.
Yes.
Right?
Now, this is where I picked up research on this as well, was starting more in the 1960s.
Sure.
And sort of the what happened at that point. And Michael Pollan wrote a really great part on marijuana in his book, The Botany of Desire.
Mm-hmm.
So he took 4 different plants and basically explained how they almost have this weird symbiotic relationship with people, in that they help modify people's behavior to ensure their own survival. So the apple is one, the potato is another, and the tulip is the third, and then cannabis is the 4th one. And he basically picks it up in the 1960s saying, well, yes, border agents stepped up with all these efforts, and crop dusters basically took out a huge amount of external growth fields to, up the war on drugs starting in the 60s. But what was interesting about that was then all of a sudden the move indoors. So people, because of their, the intoxicating effects and their, not dependence, but their want to have this plant, actually adapted how it's grown, which was sort of a big deal because there wasn't really, in the 1960s, a lot of science and methodology for growing things inside before marijuana.
Sure.
Which I thought was pretty interesting. I mean, that's a huge step to take something out of natural light and then be able to understand how do we train our crops to grow internally, how do we crossbreed it with other varieties to make sure that it can become more disease resistant, all these things that are really sort of thoughtful activities that you would put towards something that's more of like corn or edible foods was instead concentrated in on marijuana.
I mean, it's one of those things where I don't know. It's like, people like feeling good, right? Like people. I mean, even look at food, right? Like even look at you mentioned vegetables and other kind of like crops and stuff, right? Like think about how much time and effort and money and knowledge has human time has been spent perfecting recipes to make food more enjoyable, right? Like that has ultimately we could all be drinking Soylent and we'd be fine, right? But evidently everyone but the guy that invented Soylent thinks it's a terrible idea.
Do you know why?
It takes the joy out of life.
People. Okay.
Well, but seriously though, I mean, so I it's really interesting. I think that a lot of times these things that are, I mean, there's a whole other factor to this, which is that it was the use of these, the vices of the poor, the vices of the lower classes, the vices of those not in power are always made to seem vulgar and oftentimes outlawed by those in power, right? Because it's a way of further controlling a population, right? I mean, marijuana grows. It grows like a weed, right? It grows. It was natural to some of these areas, and it was very readily available. And so by outlawing it or making it difficult to obtain or etc., all these different things that we put onto it,
killing it outside. Killing it. Like to me, that's besides the idea of you being, it being intoxicating to you and you wanting to feel good. That's like the evolution of the plant. That's the plant's survival instinct is I have to reward. There has to be the reward for these people for me to still
be outside.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, well, they're growing. It grows like a weed outside, but all of a sudden it's like, it's getting, there's a crackdown in the 1960s, massive, crop spraying. They have to, but people like the plant has motivated people to help it evolve and to help it survive and not become extinct. Because in some ways, if it didn't have some sort of appeal, it would have died out.
See, but that's kind of like a chicken or the egg question, right? It's not really a chicken or the egg question. It's just that it was useful for us. That's why it survived. Not that it didn't develop that. It did not have in mind, I guess, people, or it did not have in mind the enjoyment of other things when it developed that tool. It just happened to evolve that way, right? But
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I will say that was that's sort of the interesting part of Paulin's book on the botany of desire and sort of how these four very different plants have interacted with people at different times. And to your point, like the potato, during the potato famine, apples, which when fermented become alcohol, the tulip, which is tulip fever in Amsterdam, and became sort of the status symbol, and then marijuana, like all these things, I think in some way do have some sort of, they're maybe not conscious, like we're talking about, do plants have feelings, but have some sort of agency to survive and have adapted to be able to be grown indoors.
Interesting. I hear you there. So
yeah, it is interesting.
Okay, so we have this.
If you were high, it would be fascinating.
So interesting.
You would be like, "Oh my god!"
So let's
get feelings, you guys. I knew it.
Let's get into some of the, I guess, propaganda, right?
Oh, I love this.
So probably the most famous one known is Reefer Madness, which was a book. It was a movie. It was actually originally called Tell Your Children. And then at other times it's been called things like The Dope Addict, Doped Youth, Love Madness, The Burning Question, things like that, whatever, right? So basically what it is it's it's these kids get out of high school. They decide to have marijuana together. They get into a hit and run. They kill some dude. They
And then he comes back and he haunts them with the hook. No.
They start hallucinating. They just completely become. They end up like, babbling and clearly trying to be shown as being insane and stuff and whatever. And the basic idea is basically it was originally put out, like I said, in 1936. And the idea was that it was it was put out by a group that was trying to make it clear that marijuana could be dangerous to your kids. Right. And so it was shown in theaters and things. And it's kind of interesting because it's sort of so originally it was made by a church group. Right. And so it's supposed to be this kind of tale of like, kids gone bad. And then what's the word? Kids gone bad and then, gone crazy and things. Right. But actually, it was the original cut of the film was actually purchased by an exploitation filmmaker, right? So those kind of movies of like, that's like you look back in like the 40s and the 50s and the 30s and like pulp movies, right? And so
the cult classic.
And so he basically added in all these like other crazy things, right? Like the murder and the orgies and whatever. It was not actually an orgy or anything, but so it was originally shown at kind of road shows, right? So originally it was released in kind of select markets. So it was released like in the South, in Colorado, in New England, and in Pennsylvania. Then it was purchased and shown at roadshow screenings. And the idea is that it's supposed to be shown to kids. Originally, it was supposed to be shown to kids to say to them, "This is what'll happen if you have marijuana." And actually, the movie ends with a guy pointing at the screen and saying, "The next tragedy may be that of your daughter or your son or yours or yours." And then it points right at you and it says, "or yours." And then the words "tell your children" kind of like scroll and appear on the screen. It is hilarious. It's like it's so bad watching it today, right? It's only it's what's crazy is the budget for this. I saw this today when I was researching. The budget for Reefer Madness was $100,000.
That's kind of a good chunk of change.
It's crazy. That doesn't make any sense. So the movie kind of shows aside to the marijuana question, or aside to, I guess, this use of marijuana that has really been propagated around, to promote its prohibition, right? That marijuana can cause you to go mad.
Yes. That
marijuana will cause you to act more violently or more criminally. That it will, it will cause you to lose all inhibitions, and so
your kids will lose control.
One big
big
thing that's present throughout all of the propaganda, and all these kind of, if you look back at marijuana posters of the time period, a very common theme is this drug, this thing is going to cause your daughters to go out and have sex.
Yes.
Right. Like that's the biggest, that is like the foundation to all of this stuff, that, it's never really directed like your sons are going to become outlaws or whatever. It's always like, this is a pretty girl in this poster, holding on to a hunky demon with big muscles who, clearly is about to just, lay some pipe.
Clearly
right?
has,
things are about to happen.
Clearly has intent.
Yeah.
Clearly has intent. Oh, yeah, and you cannot have that. You cannot have your female population out there, getting it on and smoking marijuana. No. Just ask my dad.
It's so bad, Marie. So
bad,
here's the thing.
People.
What we have found, though, at least in the United States, is that really the United States is like we're not really the last country to figure this out, but we're one of the bigger ones for this bad kind of use of it, I suppose.
Oh, yeah.
Marijuana in the United States has always had this view of it as being this terrible thing. It has no good uses. It's like heroin. It's like I mean, even heroin has uses as a pain medicine, right? But you know that this drug has absolutely no use, and so it is only dangerous. It'll only turn your kids into sex crazed freaks, and you know it's always going to be bad for you. But actually, today, that was, I would say, the dominant viewpoint 20 years ago, right? When I was a kid, when I was 8 years old, you know, it was we would have people come in. We had this group called Dare, right?
Yeah,
which was
I remember that.
Yeah,
they were
awesome. Drug.
Did they do like a funky fresh
They
rap?
sure did.
You?
Drug abuse resistance education.
Oh, wow.
Marie, we were in the big city. Of course they rapped for us.
Of course they did.
Of course they did. We actually, I remember we had a day at my school where, again, grew up in like the most, I basically grew up I might as well have grown up in a scene from My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Right? Like the biggest, like these big Italian or Greek or wacky families, whatever, all, you know, well, forget about it. Right? Like nothing even remotely dangerous ever actually happened in my neighborhood. We had a day though at school where we were all supposed to wear red to show that we weren't afraid of the Bloods. Like the gang, the Bloods. And it was like a bunch of like 10-year-olds wearing red. And Dare was like, yeah, we're going to get drugs out of this neighborhood. And it's like, we're not going to. Anyways.
Question. Just if we could pause here for a moment, just so I can wrap my head around this. Your school at Staten Island,
Yes.
correct? Was it plagued by gang violence?
Not our area. If anything,
No,
wearing all red seems to show support for the Bloods. I'm surprised we didn't get killed by the Crips.
Were the Bloods a thing?
They were a thing.
Like, that's what I don't understand.
I mean, they still are a thing.
The Bloods and the Crips. Okay. All right, so that's good. We have gotten that established. I just
Marie,
don't
you're
really
gonna
think
get us hit.
A bunch of
we can't be making these big. We can't be making these big gang claims, Marie.
These a gang war. But like a bunch of like little white kids wearing red is so cute, and you're all like,
I'm sure.
Don't do it. Just say no.
I'm sure the drug dealers were like, those are the kids to go for. Those ones right there. And actually today, it's interesting.
They're probably like,
it seems like none of that. It seems like none of that stuff works because Staten Island today is like one of the heroin capitals of the world. So like,
yeah, look
swing and a miss there, Dare.
Look what happened with the opioid
swing and a miss there, PS42. Yeah. Anyways, so
I guess wearing red didn't work.
I even remember so here's I guess a little bit of personal story for me, I suppose. When my dad got very, very sick. My dad was in chemotherapy for a very long time, and when I was in high school, it was like, well, one of the things that seems to work to make him not feel so crappy is marijuana, right? And it's known to be good for that kind of thing. And so to my mind, it was always, I mean, like, of course, like any kid, whatever, right? But, to me, though, it was always like, it was a medicine, right? Or it could be used as a medicine, I suppose, right? It wasn't really until, I guess, I don't know, like it has both uses as a medicine and then also as a recreational thing that doesn't really do any harm to anyone, right? It's just, I mean, it can be abused just like alcohol, right? It can be misused just like alcohol. But ultimately it is not any more dangerous than, in fact, it's less dangerous in my mind than alcohol is.
Much less so. Interesting side note for me as well, my dad, like when I was growing up in Colorado, had like zero tolerance for this type of stuff, man. We're not, marijuana. And it's like, he first of all, he had no idea what a bong looked like. I don't even think he's ever smoked. He had, at that point, had never smoked marijuana. Didn't know what a bong looked like. Didn't know what a pipe looked like. Didn't know what it smelled like. But man alive, I would have, God, holy hell, anyway, came home. So it was like, it was very much vigilance in our house about that. But now I come home, my parents are, my parents are growing a little older and they have aches and pains, and Boulder, Colorado has legalized it at this point. And so all of a sudden, I got this hippie long hair, my father telling me how cool marijuana is. And it's like, Maria, I don't know if you know this about this, but this isn't all that bad. Like, I feel kind of happy when I take it. And I'm like, shut up, old man. He's like, no, really, this is, I think this is okay. And I'm like, no, you don't. No, you don't. Throw out all this. Do you see all this? And like, all of a sudden, there's all this edibles in my house. I'm like, look, no, not in this house. No, sir. No, I don't think so. This is a gateway drug. No, I feel pretty good. Like, I have some, and I just sit back, and I laugh a lot. I giggle. I don't see what the big deal is. I'm like, really? Really? You don't see what the big deal is now, huh? Grounded for 3 weeks because, you thought like the brownie I got down at the bakery down at the bottom of the hill was a hash brownie.
Oh my goodness, Marie. You were a bad kid, Marie.
That's the sad thing. Is it's like, I really was not.
I didn't even get to have any damn bad fun.
I didn't even have like at that point have the audacity to rebel or do anything like that. It wasn't, that barely is hitting me now, but man, like, it just cracks me up because my dad's like, well, I don't understand what all the fuss is about. And I'm like, oh, you don't, do you, old timer? Let me explain it to you.
Hilarious.
Anyways, got that off my chest. Cheaper than therapy. Thank you for listening.
Good stuff. Okay, so here's kind of the interesting thing, I think, with or one of the interesting things with marijuana's use in the United States today is, so for a very, very long time, marijuana has been one of the major reasons people get incarcerated in the United States. Right? That's kind of where it's been most useful, I think, for law enforcement to have it be illegal, is that it's a really good way to get someone who might be involved in criminal activity, or you suspect is involved in criminal activity. It's a really good way to stop their car because, I smell marijuana. Mm-hmm. It's a really good way to get someone on a smaller charge or on a non-violent charge that can still hold extremely long sentences depending on how much and how often they're caught with it or how many times they've been caught with it. And in many ways, that leads to people making the claim that, in some ways, the drug war is very similar to it's wasted resources, and it's in some ways akin to modern day slavery, right? Because we are incarcerating people and then making them work, which is the definition of slavery. But anyways, yes.
That's why I thought it was so interesting that de Blasio has said no more. We're not going to make these arrests anymore in New York City, which I would assume is a city that is relatively.
Of course,
prevalent.
I mean, a lot of
is the low lying arrests for lesser charges like that can be added up easily to incarcerate.
Well, a lot of states too, though, or a lot of cities have said, we're also going to throw away all those convictions. Or some cities are starting to say that, right? But I think Seattle is one that is thinking about doing that. Right? That's really, in my mind, you can't give someone back the years that they wasted in prison, right? And at this point, if you've been in prison for 10 years because you had, whatever, right?
Dope charges, yeah.
That
charges,
is probably going to end up with you being, it's not like you were training to do a job skill in prison, right? Like, no matter how good we like to think that prisons are reforming people, I don't know anyone in the United States who thinks they're actually reforming people effectively. It's just not a great way to get back into society, right? Not a great way to spend your 20s and 30s. Anyways, so this episode, though, what I guess the challenge for law enforcement, the challenge for parents, and the challenge for people who want to use marijuana, who want to smoke weed, who want to whatever, you go out to a party, whatever, is
like my dad.
There is a tremendous amount of misinformation on the internet, right? So, and a lot of it centers around the use of CBD oil. A lot of it centers around the use of THC. the use of other components within the marijuana plant for smoking, right? For ingesting in some way for different treatments. So if you just Google like health benefits of CBD oil, you will get a tremendous amount of crap. Like,
and a link to Black South.
oh, of course you will. It basically says, okay, well, it a lot of the claims about, so this is one, fights multi-drug resistant bacteria. Almost, can slow the progression of tuberculosis, destroys bacteria.
Of tuberculosis, it slows down tuberculosis.
This says other remedies to consider. Don't want to try cannabidol? There is also research on using garlic, honey, and oregano oil for drug-resistant strains, but work with a practitioner experienced in infectious diseases. If you have a drug-resistant bacteria, I don't think you're going to be on wellnessmama.com. I think you're going to be in the hospital.
Well, and if you are, get off it.
Yeah. Here's one. Reduces oxidative stresses, helps for schizophrenia, promotes a healthy weight, improves heart health, improves skin conditions, fights cancer. Nope.
There's another one. There's another one of those cancer ones, man.
Nope. Now, here's the thing. It is useful. Let's take the cancer claim, for example, right? Mm-hmm. It is known that, or at least it has been shown, and a lot of this is anecdotal as well, right? Frankly, a lot of this is anecdotal because the research into the use of marijuana and other components of marijuana. So, by the way, CBD and THC are both components of the marijuana plant, right? So, CBD is basically like the non-psychoactive component, and THC is the one that does kind of make you feel high, right? So, CBD oil is, I guess, a good alternative for people potentially who want to use some of these things, but don't necessarily want to get that high feeling. But really, a lot of the components, a lot of the benefits of marijuana come from its THC, right? Which is tetrahydrocannabinol or cannabinol. Sorry. Because what it does basically is it allows you to, basically what it lets you do is it kind of calms you down in many ways, right? And it is a drug. It is a chemical component that will do different things for you, right? So, for instance, THC has been shown to be helpful in multiple sclerosis, in neurodegenerative disorders, in Tourette syndrome, in cervical dystonia, in epilepsy. But in all of those cases, though, it has been put forward as a potential good use, but has not necessarily been shown to be effective in the science, in the studies that have been done, right? Now, for multiple sclerosis, it has been found to be useful in the treatment of spasticity, right? Specifically, oral cannabis extracts have been found to be effective. It has been found to be effective in centrally mediated pain and painful spasms, and also been found to be useful for bladder dysfunction, right? So for multiple sclerosis, it has been shown to be very interestingly effective for different things. Now, really though, its use as a medicinal plant has been limited, right? There have really only been, maybe 50 to 100 studies of any kind of really, and the number of studies that have been done on a very high number of patients, so that there is a higher quality to its study, is relatively low still.
Yeah.
Right. However, it is a very interesting potential. It's an interesting potential treatment.
Well, also because it's just becoming legalized, you would see hopefully more, double-blind actual studies to test for these types of things and to see what it would be effective for versus what it's just sort of a placebo effect or ineffective, is my hope for something like that. So the favorite fun fact that I have for marijuana myth is, let me find it. Well, there's a couple ones. One is how long, this is actually more of a good question, is weed will stay in your system for 30 days. So if you're being drug tested, you know, you can't smoke it because it stays in your blood system for 30 days, which I thought was like, it dawned on me, I have absolutely no idea whether that was true or not. So it's like, I would assume it would have to do with like, you know, in the little bit of research I did was like a half-life and the THC level and sort of what your weight is and how often do you smoke it and sort of what is its lasting effect in your body, right? To see when it would actually wear off with like metabolism. So I think that's like sort of a pretty common myth is like, can you take a drug test to cheat it and get rid of it and mask the effects of it with something else, which I don't think you can. There is no such thing as a detox. There's no detox kit that can rid your body of that overnight. Right? So if you're out there burning up and then the next day you have a drug test, you know, unless you have somebody else's pee, you're kind of SOL.
Please don't use someone else's pee. So
I'm not saying I'm just saying it's an option that people have used in the past. I'm not saying it's legal, or am I endorsing it?
Phenomenal. Wow, so responsible, Marie.
I am hugely responsible.
Now here's the interesting thing.
Just ask my stoner father.
Good God. You're probably at home listening right now and saying to yourselves, why is it so difficult to study medical marijuana? Right. So I just kind of gave, I'm sure, an interesting, probably a stat that's pretty astounding to some people, which is that really the studies on marijuana's medicinal use as both CBD and THC are extremely limited. The reason is that the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and other government agencies basically still have many legal restrictions on its use and its study. So for instance, you actually can't grow marijuana even in a research lab for testing purposes, right? You can't, the only way to get it is to get it from the federal government. You have to get different, you have to work within very strict limitations on concentration and on length of study and the number of patients and the types of diseases and things like that. So it's extremely difficult to actually do any kind of really good research study on medical marijuana. Now, there is some hope that governments will actually change their policies in, both for research and for legalization, right? However, it's also partly a big issue of the study of marijuana's effects versus the placebo effect are also very, very difficult, right? So this is actually from a really interesting study, medical marijuana research. This is from the journal CMAJ. So and it's the Journal of the American Medical. So it's I'm going to start this section again, Jay, because I am bumbling like a fucking moron. So one of the challenges really for the study of medical marijuana is that there are significant limitations and significant barriers from government on what you can research, how you can research it, how much, like what concentration you can use for your study, and also even how you get the THC or CBD to do your study itself, right? So you actually have to contact the government to get those samples. You can't grow marijuana on your own for study, and you obviously have to apply for it. And so if the government's policy is that marijuana is bad for you, but you're trying to do a study that says, well, actually marijuana is very helpful in some certain ways, they might not fund you. They might not send you samples. They might not be cooperative, right? And so the number of
the oversight with the FDA is like you're going to go through multiple rounds of oversight for something like that. So I mean, it's a huge amount of bureaucracy, which is good in some occasions, but for something like this, which would be almost kind of an emerging technology, it's not. Yeah,
and the other thing too is that another huge challenge is that because there hasn't really been any kind of study on this kind of a drug before, especially with all the various ways to administer marijuana, it becomes very, very difficult to study, is one method more effective than the other? How do you get rid of the placebo effect in particular? So this is actually a really good, this is from a paper called Medical Marijuana Research from the Canadian Medical Association Journal. This is published in 2016 by Campbell et al. So this quote is, quote, "With marijuana, several placebo effects come into play. Marijuana has a distinct smell and taste, which may elicit classical conditioning responses. Placebo science research holds strong evidence for the effect of classical conditioning related to odor and taste. Caffeine-associated stimuli, like the smell and taste of coffee, for example, are shown to increase skin conductance responses and startle eye blink reflexes in the absence of caffeine. In addition, visual cues associated with smoking marijuana, such as cigarettes, smoke, or lighters, may elicit the placebo effect and still remain a factor in even the most well-controlled recent studies. The method of marijuana administration in dose and new trials can carry powerful placebo effects. Will the marijuana be inhaled, injected, or administered topically or sublingually? Placebo science shows that placebo injections work better than placebo pills, and that four placebos work better than 2. The strength of the effect of marijuana may differ greatly depending on the method of administration." So basically, the way you actually study marijuana, the way that you study its administration, and the way that you control those tests to ensure that there is no placebo effect is also really difficult, right? It's very similar to that kind of sketch. It's like an old trope in movies and TV shows and stuff where, you know, you give a group of teenagers non-alcoholic beer and they end up getting drunk somehow still, right? They just convince themselves that they're getting drunk. It's the same kind of thing here, right? And because most of its uses are for things like nausea and anxiety and other kind of issues that are in some ways not to diminish their severity, right? Especially in cases, say, of you know, like loss of appetite due to chemotherapy or something, right? But in many ways, the actual usefulness of marijuana, it's not like, you know, you take this and it's gonna shrink your tumor, right? Things that you would expect to not have a placebo effect. It's basically directly affecting how you feel at the moment, and that is very variable with placebo effects.
Yeah, it could also be more psychosomatic.
Right, 100%. So,
yeah. Interesting.
Now, this episode, we kind of wanted to go over the general, you know, the background, the history, kind of where we got to today and why it is so very difficult to actually do these kind of studies on this plant. Right? Because ultimately, I mean, if you think about even, say, the studies on the use of tobacco, right? Those actually have a very similar, what's the word? A very similar kind of,
Stigma.
not even stigma necessarily. These have a very similar methodological problem, right?
Oh,
where,
yes.
It's very difficult to get the sense of, you know, where does the environment start having an effect and where is it actually this thing that people do every day for their entire lives? Not every, you know what I'm saying, right? If someone smokes a pack a day, they can get cancer. But if someone smokes one a day, they might also still get cancer, right? Do you weight that the same way, right? On the effectiveness, how do you control for those kind of variables? What about the way that they smoke, right? Is someone who does chewing tobacco more likely to get cancer than someone who smokes, than someone who does hookah, than someone who smokes cigars only? You know, there's all kinds of different questions still, again, here that even still are not necessarily answered even for tobacco use, right? So,
well, and also tobacco and nicotine are addictive while marijuana is not.
Right, well, absolutely. So now those myths, though, the ideas of, is marijuana addictive? Is marijuana a gateway drug?
Is it a gateway
can marijuana cure cancer? Can it help you overcome?
Does it kill brain cells?
Can it help you overcome a mental illness? Those kind of myths are the things we're really going to dive deep into next episode. And so if you, listener, have a favorite marijuana myth, please shoot the show an email, because I'd love to hear them. I've heard, I don't know, Marie, can you think of any weird ones you heard when you were a kid?
That George Washington grew it in his backyard.
He probably grew hemp.
I don't, hey man, founding father of our country, maybe. Maybe it was just for, rope. Maybe it was for recreational use.
I mean, I would not be.
Never know, but that's one of the myths, right? That's a huge myth. I'd
actually never heard that one.
Cycling through.
Super interesting.
Nice.
George Washington grew in his backyard.
I don't know. I'll tell you what, I'll call my dad this weekend and see if he's got any good ones for us too.
Nice. All right, dear listeners. Well, that's it for this week's episode. Thank you again so much for listening. We are a Damn It Chippy production. Got a lot of really exciting news on that front coming up here too soon.
Yes.
We also are going to do some patron shout outs this episode. So we have a couple of new patrons here. We have Molly Smith.
Molly Smith giving us money. We love it for you.
We have Molly Townsend.
Molly's!
Yeah.
Multiple Molly's.
2 Molly's, Marie.
Double Molly. We're double Mollying down.
It's amazing.
Bam.
We also have...
It's more Molly's than last week.
I'm telling you. We also have Rosie Deloach and Rosie Deloach. I hope I'm getting that right. And Edwin Hernandez Gunn.
You guys are awesome, and we love you.
So awesome. It's super great.
Awesome,
I'm
man.
so excited. Thank you so much. You're all in the running for the scary painting. It's gonna be great.
Yes, we have to. When are we getting that thing out of our house?
We're gonna do it next week, Marie.
Okay, because the neighborhood birds are falling out of their trees dead, and it's springtime, and that's really a sad thing to be happening.
100%.
Man.
So actually,
just around the garage.
Rosie, who supports us here now on Patreon, is actually one of the hosts of the Rabbit Hole Motel, which we highly suggest you go check that out. It's going to be a really good show, and it is a good show. It's not going to be a good show. It is a good show currently. So go check it out. I really enjoy it so far. So take a listen.
Yes.
All right, folks, and that's it, Marie, for this week.
Beautiful. You guys have a lovely week. Remember, just say no.
Just say no to the devil's lettuce. Satan's cabbage. All right.
Satan's cabbage. Good night.
Thank you again, dear listeners, for listening to the Mad Scientist podcast. I have been your host, Chris Cogswell, joined by my co-host,
Marie Mayhew.
If you'd like to contact the show, please send us an email at themadscientistpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can also follow us on Twitter at Mad Scientist Pod or at Team Giant Squid for Marie. And of course, you can see us on Facebook, on Instagram, and all over the internet as the Mad Scientist Podcast. And again, our logo is the one with the pumpkin head, so it's easy to see.
Mm-hmm.
If you've enjoyed the show tonight, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where the money that you give to us will help us to promote this show further, to make it better, and just to spend more time making it.
Yes, we love doing that.
We do love doing that. Our logo was designed by Carrie Shaheen. Our web design is done by Desdemona Howard.
Woohoo!
And our sound design is done by Jake Cardinal. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you. This has been a Damn It Chippy production.